What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If. If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my third channel, so if you want some more what ifs, go check out my other channels. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Naruto drank his tea in silence. No one was in his room save for the servant that was placed to serve his every need. The boy took a deep breath, trying to get the images from his mind. Lava, and those three people, who are they? Naruto asked. It felt like I knew them, and they knew my name, but everyone knows my name. They didn't dress like they're from Westeros, though probably one of those weird Essosi dressing styles I've heard about, but I know no one from Essos or anyone of Essosi descent. Naruto kept thinking on the girl of the group. She had emerald eyes, a color that seemed a lot like his Lannister family's own eyes, but hers were fiercer. But what he really couldn't get out of his head was the ridiculous color of her hair. Pink. Naruto frowned and pressed the back of his head against the headboard and frowned. Maybe that was just a strange bit of imagination. Running amok dreams always did end up being strange in the end, with barely any logic to them. He frowned and kept his glare to the head of the room. He couldn't believe that what he saw was merely a dream. It felt too real. He felt the heat, and he felt the lava melt his skin from his body and then move on to the flesh from his bones. He could feel every second of it, but for some reason that felt more like a nightmare than the truth. The truth must have been different. Naruto smirked softly. Of course it was different. Naruto smirked. There's no way in seven hells that I'd die like that. I guess I have to thank the gods for giving me this strange though annoying power. I managed to strengthen my body enough to take the damage and still be alright, but only knocked out. If only I could get something like that without these stupid dreams. Suddenly the door opened to reveal none other than his mother. Cersei looked like she'd been crying and harshly told the servant to leave the room. The servant hobbled from the room, clearly embarrassed or completely terrified. Probably both. Naruto's eyes followed his mother as she pulled a seat over and sat next to her son, her hand resting on his, trying her best to show nothing on her face. She was tearing herself up inside at what she had Jamie do. She wasn't thinking at the time and only thought of her and Jamie. She was gripping the bed furs and gripping Naruto's hand a little too tightly. She eyed Naruto nervously, looking over his scarred arms and to his otherwise unscathed body with curiosity. Tears formed in her eyes, though glimmering her green orbs. She looked to Naruto and grabbed his head and held him close, hugging him tightly, and cried into his unruly blonde hair. The boy's body was cold and he began to sweat from the sudden interaction between himself and his mother. She didn't let him go though and continued to cry onto his head and rubbed her thumb against the stitches on his scarred temple. He was confused. What brought this out? Mother. Naruto gave her a weird look. Why are you doing all of this all of a sudden? I know that I haven't shown it much. Cersei wiped her nose. I just want you to know that I love you and your brothers and sister more than life itself. I just want you to know that I regret not showing you that love ahead of time. And Mother. Naruto gave her an incredulous look. I don't know what to say. Is this because I almost died falling from a wall? It was a tower, you fool. Cersei shouted. You fell so far. I don't know what any of you are talking about. Naruto's frown deepened. All I remember was messing up my balance on the wall before waking up here in this bed. Mother, is there something that you're not telling me? No, of course not, my love. Cersei bent forward and kissed Naruto's sweaty forehead. But I want to know everything that you remember from yesterday. Everything. Naruto looked at her and frowned. I can't do that. Cersei watched him downcast, her hand still clasping onto his. She began to rub her thumb on his rough scarred skin, her green eyes locking with his. From trying to figure him out, she wanted to know the truth. She had to know the truth. What he knew could tear their family apart and in turn the entirety of House Lannister. She couldn't let her family fall apart. She held him tight, trying her best not to show any slights in her facial expression. What do you mean? Cersei tried her best not to ask between clenched teeth. Every time I try to think between the wall and waking up, it's all dark and there's no memories of anything. Naruto sighed. But for some reason I am seeing images of falling into lava. These images are terrifying and feel so real. As the dream passes, it started to scare me, Mother, and this isn't the first time that these dreams have plagued me. Cersei kept her gaze on the boy, watching him with an uncertain eye. There was no fault in his shimmering sapphire Baratheon eyes. He was serious, and the look of hurt that he displayed broke Cersei's heart. The longer she stared into his eyes, she looked away, not being able to take the pain her second son put on display. The boy slid underneath his bed furs and laid his head against the pillows and stared aimlessly at the ceiling, examining the ceiling posts and the different stones used for the ceiling and the walls. He wasn't going to be saying anything, so Cersei rose from her seat and placed a small kiss on her son's forehead and bid him farewell. Naruto. The boy opened his eyes only to be met by bright white. He was floating and there seemed to be no end to the plane. He trailed his eyes left and right, wondering what happened. This isn't Winterfell. anymore, but something else entirely. He felt at ease and at peace. There was no hatred or anger within him. He was no longer in pain and he was no longer feeling lost. He stayed silent, though waiting for the voice to make an appearance. Naruto. He shot around trying to find this person. He could be anywhere in this vast expanse of empty white light. Naruto took deep breaths and took a step forward, only to hear the soft clack of his black sandals, and not the soft clack of his heavy boots. As Baratheon eyes nearly shot from his sockets at the sight of his clothes, orange pants with an orange coat of sorts with black sleeves. Naruto froze and immediately dropped his jaw in disgust. Whatever kind of joke this was, he wasn't liking it. This garb of sorts was strange to him, but for some reason comfortable. He shook his head as a shiver ran up and down his body. Comfortable or not, this was an eyesore. Damn it, Naruto, look at me, the voice said, clearly getting irritated. Where you? Look behind you, dope. The voice sighed in defeat. Kami, you're still an idiot. What? Naruto asked. Just know that I knew you in a past life, the man responded. We were close. Naruto tilted his head in confusion, but let the man continue. That's beside the point. He shook his head. You have to know something though. There is a darkness coming to the world, a powerful darkness, one that has been sleeping for thousands of years. Naruto, you will need a weapon that can defeat them, a weapon that can defeat any and all in its path. What weapon is that? Naruto asked with wide eyes, clearly believing this to be some strange and informative dream. The Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the man responded. You'll find it in Asshai near the Shadowlands. Asshai. Naruto's eyes had never been so wide. Don't jest, I'm not Naruto. The man shook his head. You will need to go to Asshai one day soon. It might not be tomorrow or even within the next month, but just know that it'll be one day soon. Asshai will be the gateway for you to realize your destiny. Naruto shot from his bed once again, sweat pouring down his forehead. Something though was trickling from his temple and running against his ear. He traced his hand against the thicker liquid. He sighed in defeat when he realized it to be blood. It seems that even when he has the dreams, the scar likes to open and bleed. He rested his head against the headboard after wiping the blood away, thinking on what he was told. Asshai Kusanagi no Tsurugi destiny. He shook his head, pressing his skull against the hard oak headboard, trying to figure all of this out. The dreams were getting worse, and now someone came to him claiming to know him in a past life. Naruto rested his face in his palms, trying not to stress too hard. His body was stiff and rigid. His forehead was on fire. Maester Luwen said he was fine to walk, but also said that he was to rest for an entire day to make sure that there was no lasting damage done to his body. The maester never did say anything about a burning forehead or how to deal with these strange dreams of his. Naruto frowned. His mother was completely surprised by his revelation about his dreams. He could have sworn though that his mother looked in disbelief of what he said. He felt that he was missing something, that his mother wasn't saying, she was hiding something, and he knew it. Naruto breathed softly, trying to calm down. After everything he's been taught, he learned that the calm and patient receive the best rewards. He needed to think this through. He needed to stay conserved. His blue eyes trailed left and right, examining the room, looking for faults and even for a sign of life. No one had come to see him or watch over him. The boy took a deep breath and pushed the bed furs away. Despite his orders of a full day of rest, he hobbled over with weak legs towards his chamber pot and loosened his breeches. After a few minutes he'd relieved himself and walked back towards the bed, feeling satisfied and at ease. But something caught the corner of his eye. He walked back, tracing his steps, and watched the courtyard with a fearful eye. A stable was lit ablaze. Men ran back and forth with buckets of water, trying their best to stop the flame from growing any larger. Baratheon, Lannister and Stark all together tried their best to calm the raging flames. Naruto looked in awe at how fast the fire was spreading and felt an urge to rush out there and help with dousing the flames. Making up his mind, the boy backed away and started to walk back to his bed to get his boots until the door swung open. You're not supposed to be out of bed yet. Who are you? Naruto asked with wide eyes. I'm just a man trying to finish what he started. He reached over to his belt and drew a dagger, stylized and beautiful. Why you pushed me from the tower? Naruto asked with wide eyes. Figured it out that fast? The man asked with a disgusting smirk on his face. He rushed forward, kicking Naruto to the stone floor, ready to take his life. The man stomped on Naruto's gut and kicked his back, forcing him over onto his chest. Blood was starting to course from his headscarf, filling his body with power. Naruto glared when his legs started to strengthen and his arms began to feel loose and free. Before the man could bring his blade down onto Naruto, the man was suddenly tackled by a gray blob of gray. Naruto rolled over as the man yelped and screamed, crying out for help. He begged for mercy, but none came from the newcomer. Naruto watched gray wind maul into the man, digging his maw into the man's back and spine, chewing him to death. He screamed as gray wind sunk his teeth into his muscles and peeled skin from his bones. The man wasn't dead yet, and it seemed that gray wind was taking his sweet time killing the man. Before long, in a puddle of blood, the man lay with no throat or neck to see, save for the bloodied spine that was left in its wake. Gray wind's maw was covered in blood, his teeth painted crimson with flesh dangling in between. For a moment Naruto actually forgot that direwolves were hunters and powerful creatures to behold. Grey Wind watched Naruto keeping hazelnut eyes locked with Naruto's Baratheon sapphire. Rob rushed into the room, his sword drawn and a glare marring his face. He was panting but immediately sighed in relief. Naruto was alive and well, and Grey Wind saved him. Ice, there was so much ice everywhere, ice and snow billed in all directions. He was here struggling against the heavy winds. Snow pelted his body and pressed against his face. Naruto looked down to his hands and found he was glowing with a golden fire and strange black markings all over his body. At least he was no longer wearing that ridiculous orange garb that he had on before. He stared throughout the strange snowy land, wondering what had happened to the previous world he was in. Next to him, standing on a black platform of sorts, was the same black-haired man from before. One eye was a blood-red eye with 3 strange markings surrounding his pupil, and the other eye was completely red with even more strange markings surrounding the pupil. The two of them were glaring at something. They were in a fight, but Naruto just couldn't figure out who they were supposed to be battling. In the far distance, over strange rocky outcroppings with icicles and snow fall, a castle of shimmering ice was seen. Naruto, behind us, the man cried out. The boy opened his eyes. He pulled the bed furs off of his body and sat up, revealing his booted feet everywhere. Friends and family were watching him with worry. He was restless in his sleep, and Maester Lewin didn't know what to make of it. He didn't say a word though, and slid his legs over, resting his feet on the bed frame. His hands rested on his knees and his mind was empty. His eyes seemed dulled over, his skin was pale compared to what it normally was. His back was hunched and his body trembled. Sasuke, Naruto thought. I remember your name. It's Sasuke. Time skip. Joffrey frowned at the news. Well, frown was an easy way to put it. He sipped at his chalice with a dark look on his face. He was recently told of disturbing news. Joffrey wasn't liking the way things were turning out. Ever since his brother decided to be good at fighting, their father finally decided to care more about their lives. But instead of caring about Joffrey, Robert always yelled at him, asking why he wasn't more like Naruto. Joffrey couldn't take it. It has only been 3 days since Naruto's fall from the tower, and to him Naruto is just a weak fool. That can't be good for anything if he let an enemy push him from a tower. He felt that if Naruto could fall from a wall because of lost balance, Naruto didn't deserve anything but the same that Joff was receiving. Joffrey never once visited his brother while he was asleep, never once caring about his well-being. Hearing Tommen and Marcella constantly whine and ask when Naruto was going to be alright angered him. He distinctly heard the Maester say that Naruto was going to live, and he distinctly remembered hearing that he'd awoken at least thrice during his time in rest. He clenched his chalice, visibly irritated by the attention his younger, obviously more talented brother was getting. Joffrey glared at the wall in front of him. Since there was no one else in the great hall, he growled and took another sip of his wine and wrapped his hand around the hilt of his sword. He always believed that calming down was for women and children. Even now he was getting near to swing his sword. At the table, he wanted to relieve his frustration. Above all else, he wanted to go back to the south. This cold and this dreary place called the North was beginning to get to him. Sipping at his wine once more, Joffrey placed the chalice down and took a bite of his charred bacon, wondering what broken-minded fool would like bacon as black as this. Joffrey wondered what he would do once he was king. He gripped the bacon in between his thumb and his index finger, staring at the stiff piece of food in front of him. He smirked and decided that as his first royal edict, ban blackened bacon, he'll be king. The blonde boy surmised, what can anyone do against me? Joffrey thought, with his frown turning into a sickening smirk. Better yet, I'll even spite that younger fool Naruto in a way that no one can imagine. I want him to suffer the way that I'm suffering. No one will side with him, no one will cry for him, but everyone will love me, everyone will adore me. I'll be their king, so there isn't a choice in the matter. He chewed his bacon with a scowl before placing the remaining piece onto his wooden plate and leaned into chair on the dais. He sighed and lifted his chalice, once again sipping at his wine. Northern wine tasted dull to the boy, but this was all he had for now. Joffrey stood from his chair and walked off the dais, clacking his boots against the stone floor. His sword dangled against his thigh, his hand still wrapped tightly around the hilt. He wasn't intending to be seen by anyone until they headed down south together. At least Joffrey felt that he'd made a small victory against his younger brother. He was poised to take Sansa Stark as his lady wife one day soon and rule as king with her as his queen. Joffrey smirked, knowing that his idiot of a brother was too drunk to know that their father decided on forming a pact to take Sansa as his wife. I wonder what he'll do once he finds out. Joffrey laughed. I'll bet he'll try to fight me or something or another. I want him to show off his powers like the freak he is. I can't tell anyone, or else they'll assume that I've gone mad. I need to keep my throne, and I need Naruto out of the way. That assassin was a good touch, but I feel that it was a bad idea to start with sending someone to do something that I could have easily blamed on someone else. Joffrey sighed and continued walking. The Hound would definitely like to take a swing at Naruto for causing him to lose his left hand. I would love to see Naruto fight the Hound and see how he fares. I doubt he'll use his powers in front of everyone, but soon I'll get him. I'll Be king though, so I can easily just order that bumbling fool to show the court his powers. He'll be seen as a monster, he'll be cast out, and I'll have free reign to do with him as we please. Joffrey kept thinking, unless something else comes along then I'll just have to wait. At least I'll be taking the girl he has his eyes for, at least I have that. Joffrey walked off from the castle, avoiding the looks of his own men and the looks of the small folk. As they passed by him, his face was still in a cruel smirk filled with spite, anger, and the whole nine. He was silent though, and deigned from making a noise that even seemed like he was going to speak to someone. The Hound sighed and found Joffrey walking up behind him, his emotionless expression still prevalent on his face as ever. The Hound physically towered over Joffrey, but it seemed that the Hound had lost his will after the king removed his left hand. Sword hand or not, the Hound needed two hands to wield his great sword, to keep up with his brother. Without his left hand, the Hound knew that his brother had finally won and will never die by his hand. Naruto was suddenly stopped by someone he was not looking forward to seeing. The little figure of his uncle Tyrion came waddling up to him with a glare on his hideous face. Joffrey glared back at the little man with a smug look on his face. He grinned when his uncle walked with a little wobble to his tiny legs. He was clearly drunk. Tyrion stopped to look at Joffrey as the boy rested his forearm on the sword hilt, no longer gripping his sword. Joffrey stood with a smug look on his face and an aura of superiority with the way he spoke. Joffrey wasn't looking forward to whatever his uncle had to say. Tyrion Tough stopped and pulled out a miniature wineskin and took a quick sip before looking up to Joffrey, resting his glare on the blonde-haired boy. I haven't seen you, Tyrion said with a frown. Your brother lies in a bed wounded, and here you are finally deciding to show yourself. I was told that my brother would survive. Joffrey responded with sarcasm dripping off of his lips. Besides, I can't stand to hear the cries of women. Smack what? Joffrey looked at Tyrion with a look of horror. What is wrong with you, boy? Tyrion asked with a glare. What kind of sick ideas are running through your head? That is your brother living or not? I don't care, Joffrey responded, interrupting Tyrion yet again. Smack, you will go to your brother and apologize for not coming to see him in his state. Tyrion glared. You can't, Joffrey interrupted. Smack, you will go or I will hit you again, Tyrion said with a deepening glare. I'm telling mother, Joffrey cried, his hand tightening around his hilt. Smack, go tell your mother, Tyrion shouted, and once you're done with that you can apologize to Naruto since she's talking with him at this very moment. Tyrion smirked victoriously and took a small sip of his wine before turning on his heels once Joffrey disappeared, heading towards the keep. The Hound though gave Tyrion a worried look and leaned against the wall. He'll remember that, little Lord Sandor said suddenly. Oh, I'd hope so, Tyrion cleverly responded, and be a good dog and remind him if he ever forgets. Naruto sat with a small blush on his cheeks. His hands rested on the fur covers next to him. Rob and John were telling the boy a story of something or another, their direwolves sitting next to them, but the cause for his blushing was the girl sitting on his other side, forcefully feeding him food. Naruto could eat his food on his own, but Sansa was persistent, and now there was nothing he could do to stop her. He opened his mouth for another spoonful of whatever was in the bowl. He never did ask. On his feet, Lady was resting her head on his knee with the rest of her body on his shins. The four of them talked and laughed together, and they were growing closer and closer as the moments passed. Naruto leaned in his seat while Sansa was asking him questions about King's Landing. She asked about Court and whether or not she'd be able to see him both, to which he answered truthfully. Court was full of liars and cheaters, and he was going to make sure that they got to see each other as much as possible while they were in King's Landing. She asked about other things, the beautiful sights of King's Landing, trying to learn more about Naruto, and the two went into a deep conversation about the September of Baylor. The blessed, the beauty of the hill it was situated on gave a great view of the rest of the city. Although Flea Bottom was just a few glances away, he spoke in great detail of the sights and smells of King's Landing, the trees, the people, and the vibrant colors that made the city so great. He of course tried his best not to go into detail about Flea Bottom, not wanting to divert Sansa from wanting to go. He continued on with his stories of going around the city and meeting strange people, and even strange nobles. He of course didn't say anything about the reason behind the Hound's lost hand, despite Rob and John's questions. Sansa was listening with rapt attention, even asking along the way things that actually dealt with the conversation, surprising Rob and John. All the same, normally when someone would talk to her she'd usually stay quiet and not even care in the slightest, but Naruto managed to bring out another side to her. Suddenly Cersei entered the room. A bright and vibrant red dress was worn with elaborate metalwork on her torso. Rob, John, and Sansa stood bowing their heads to Cersei, sounding off with a chorus of "Your Grace." Cersei nodded her head at the three, and they quickly sat back down, keeping their heads turned to Naruto. Naruto looked to his mother nervously, but she simply waved him off and told him to continue talking and pretend she was invisible. Naruto shrugged anyway and went on to talk about the training field in the Red Keep's courtyard where Ser Jaime trained him whenever the Kingsguard Knight could. Naruto told them with a growing smile on his face about the grueling swordplay training that His uncle put him through even though those sessions were usually short-lived because of his duties. Cersei felt her heart break once again. Naruto idolized his uncle. He went on and on talking about how fun his uncle is, constantly making smart remarks and constantly saying sarcastic responses to anyone and everyone. Naruto even said that if he wasn't to become king then he'd want to be a knight like Sir Jaime. Rob and Jon looked to each other then back to Naruto and gave him smiles of approval. Knighthood was always an honorable goal for any high-born prince or otherwise. Sansa blushed at the implications. Seeing him in a suit of plate armor bearing the stag and the lion of Baratheon and Lannister seemed like a wonderful sight to behold. Cersei watched him, her green eyes glimmering with a bit of pride. She brought her sleeve up and wiped the corner of her eye, but that action wasn't missed by Rob. Your Grace. Rob asked, "Would you like a wipe?" "No, young Stark," she replied with a shake of her head. "I am fine." Something blew into my eye. Naruto gave his mother a small smile before continuing his story. Cersei decided to listen in on this one. It was a story of a day where he and his uncle Tyrion were together. The queen had no knowledge of this day and stayed quiet, hearing the details rush in. Naruto told them of the first time he'd ever tried wine. He was about 7 and he saw his uncle had knocked out in his guest quarters in the keep. Naruto had apparently snuck into Tyrion's quarters with the silence of a cat and started taking sips of Tyrion's wine. He said he initially spit it out, but Rob assumed that it was because his mother was there in the room after his performance at the feast. Sansa didn't believe that Naruto didn't like wine during his first few sips. He then went on to say that he found a few unopened wineskins and removed their corks and took in for the first time Arbor Gold and immediately fell in love with it. Cersei deadpanned. Naruto then went on to say that he looked around for more, but he was droopy. At that point he lifted another wineskin, but the jug was decorated with golden claws and jewels. He at the time didn't realize and dropped the wineskin in surprise, not realizing that the jug was already open. Rob was surprised when Naruto said that his hand was covered in blood. Cersei was about to scream that she finally had proof that Tyrion was indeed a little creature until Naruto decided to say the most important detail. He sipped on the blood, finding that it was cold and not warm like it would normally be. He said that the moment the wine touched his tongue he'd never felt so amazed by its taste. Unbeknownst to the boy, Cersei realized that he'd just described Dornish red strong wine, a wine as red as blood but as sweet as vengeance, and also Cersei's personal favorite. "You've got a good tongue for wine, son," Cersei suddenly piped. "Thank you, mother." Naruto smiled. "Uncle Tyrion." "Agree, Uncle Jaime, though says I'm too young to be drinking the way I've been." "Well, I'm glad that you do, Naruto." Rob smiled. "I haven't had a drinking friend before. You have one now." Naruto laughed. The boy was about to continue with another story until they heard the sound of clacking boots coming up the hall. Lady Grey, Wind, and Ghost all sat up, baring their teeth towards the door. Cersei looked at the 3 dire wolves with a strange look. It seems that the Starks' pets protect Naruto as their own. She looked towards the door, contemplating what this could mean, but from the hall came someone she wasn't expecting to show up. Joffrey arrived with a glare on his face, his hand still clenched on the hilt of his sword. He took a deep breath and looked to his mother to see her with a surprised look on her face. Joffrey turned his head back to the boy sitting in the bed. Lady, though, kept growling at him despite Sansa's desperate attempts to calm the dire wolf down. "Naruto," Joffrey finally said, "I'm sorry that I haven't been here to see you. I just couldn't stomach the thought of you almost dying. To know that you were going to live filled me with joy, brother. I just want you to know that for what it's worth. I'm sorry." "It's okay, Joffrey. Well, I'm going to my quarters." Joffrey frowned and left the room. As soon as he'd left, Cersei sighed in disbelief and walked from the room after Joffrey, leaving the group alone once again. But before she disappeared into the hall, she gave Naruto a small smile and took off after her firstborn. Back in the room, Naruto sat with a blank look on his face. Joffrey has never said those words to him before. Never has he said anything even close like that to anyone. Naruto clenched his teeth, his jaw tightening, bringing worry from Sansa to come to life. Her icy blue eyes watched him carefully, along with Rob and Jon, thinking the same. "Do you think he was telling the truth?" Sansa meekly asked. "Gods, no," Rob replied. "Joffrey's a little shit, Sansa," Jon said with frown. "I can't believe father allowed a marriage pact." "Marriage?" Rob and Naruto asked. With wide eyes, the 2 boys shared a look and glared at Jon, believing him to be jesting. "When in 7 hells was this spoken of?" Rob asked with a glare. "You 2 were passed out when it was decided," Sansa said with a frown. "Father and King Robert decided that it was time to merge House Stark and House Baratheon together by marrying me to Joffrey and Arya to Tom, and even Arya." Rob's icy eyes were wide with fright. "I'm going to feel sorry for Prince Tommen." "Why?" Naruto asked, his face aghast. "Arya is wolf blooded like me," Rob smirked. "She'll be too stubborn and she'll probably never be the perfect wife or lady that Septa Mordain keeps trying to turn her into wolf-blooded." Naruto asked, "Is that a Stark title or a Northman title?" "Starks are known to be fierce like wolves, and some of us even act like wolves," Rob responded. "Our late uncle and late aunt Brandon and Lyanna were wolf-blooded. Our father told us that wolf-blooded made you wild and unpredictable." Naruto raised an eyebrow as Rob's face dropped. Suddenly Sansa rolled her eyes and rested her hands in her lap while Lady went back to sleep on Naruto's legs. Am I wild? Rob asked with a frown. The way you swing your sword is a bit wild. Oh, stuff it, Naruto. Rob growled. He's right, Rob. John added to the Stark's displeasure. Oh, John. Naruto shook his head. You're actually worse. I thought you. I bet if Rob wasn't in the way I'd be able to beat you. John responded with a glare. But I'm better at fighting than you are, John. Rob responded, to which John deflated. One day you'll hopefully be as good as I. Men. Sansa shook her head. Always talking about fighting and wine. I thought you liked my stories, Naruto said with a look of feigned hurt. No, Naruto, I love your stories, Sansa quickly said, gripping his hand. The three boys were silent, trying their best not to laugh, but they could only make it so far. Rob, John and Naruto immediately burst into heavy bellowing laughter. John fell from his seat and Rob rested his palm on his face, covering his eyes from sight. Naruto laughed heartily, slightly offending Sansa. The girl glared at Naruto, furrowing her eyebrows at the boy. Naruto though continued to laugh, leaning back and laughed even harder. Sansa felt the corners of her lips tug. Soon enough she started laughing, gaining a surprised expression from Lady, waking the wolf from her nap. Lady, Sansa suddenly shouted. The wolf shot up and tackled Naruto against the headboard, licking his face, shutting him up. The boy's hands shot out, begging for help, waving in all directions. John and Rob looked at Sansa and back to the direwolf licking Naruto's face and decided to laugh at the boy trapped beneath a direwolf's heavy clutches. Naruto screamed and screamed, at first sounding a low octave like a normal shout, but his screams began to rise in pitch until he began to sound like a little girl and continued to beg for help and mercy, screaming that he was sorry, trying to get Lady to get off of him. Sansa relented and pet the wolf and scratched her ear caringly and kissed Lady on her little nose. Don't laugh at me like that again, Naruto, Sansa warned. Lady always did like giving kisses like that. Next time warn me. Naruto laughed suddenly though. Robert, Cersei, Ned and Caitlyn entered the room. Robert, Ned and Caitlyn had small smiles on their faces, but Cersei seemed disheveled with fear. She looked around the room for any sign of struggle pushing between Robert and Ned to get in. She looked left and right and laid her eyes on Naruto only to deadpan. His face was drenched and Sansa was giggling softly as she caressed Lady's head. Rob and John tried their best not to laugh and looked down, holding on to the bed furs for reassurance. The adults entered the room and stood in a line, allowing Joffrey into the room. The four children immediately tensed when they saw Joff. He was angry as usual and couldn't meet eyes with Naruto. The Baratheon scion tilted his head, finding Joffrey's anger to be pointed at him. I didn't do anything though, unless I did. Naruto thought I've told Joffrey about a slight change in plans, Robert said with a smile. Now my son, I don't know if you knew or not, but Joffrey was originally going to marry Sansa. Wait, originally? Ned asked, clearly having been left out of the loop. Caitlyn was no different. What happened? Well, Ned, Robert said, slapping his palm on his old friend's back, seeing how my son has taken such a liking to your daughter and his impressive skill in combat, I've decided to change our pact. Joffrey will no longer be marrying Sansa and instead Naruto will take his place. All eyes were as wide as plates. Rob actually didn't have a problem with this arrangement and started laughing. John gave Naruto a nod and pat him on his back, and Sansa immediately shot up in heat. Her cheeks were as red as her hair and her once firm hands began to shake. Naruto would have smiled under normal circumstances, but the boy kept his gaze on the seething form of his elder brother Joffrey. What is he thinking right now? Oh, and that's not all, Robert cried. Every prince needs a squire. After hearing Naruto talk to your son Brandon about knighthood and all other subjects pertaining to combat, I've decided that Bran will be Naruto's personal squire. But your grace, Caitlyn said, feeling her heart race in her chest, aren't two Starks in the south enough? Nonsense, Caitlyn. Robert let out a bellowing laugh. Your son will get to visit you here in Winterfell as much as he wants, especially with the close bond Rob and my son already have. You'll even get to see your daughter at least once a year. Can you believe it? Ned Stark and Baratheon finally bonded by more than brotherhood. It took 17 years, Ned, but we've done it. In the back of the room, hidden by the tall forms of the adults, Joffrey leaned against the wall with a broken expression. His hands were shaking with rage and his shoulders trembled. His fleece coat had never felt so heavy before. His legs were wobbling and his balance was beginning to fade. He leaned his head against the doorframe, trying his best to disappear from sight, for once wishing that the stories of invisibility and ghosts were true. He didn't want to be here. He knew that dealing with Northerners was only going to ruin him. He knew that dealing with anyone that wasn't a Lannister or Baratheon would destroy him. I will get back at you, Naruto. Joffrey glared menacingly as the tears began to sting in his eyes, his rage finally peaking. You will regret every existing, and I will see to your execution personally. Time skip. Men walked back and forth, clamoring for their supplies and their saddles. Horses neighed, fighting back against the sudden commotion within the castle's keep. King Robert, against his queen's wishes, whisked Lord Stark, their two eldest sons, along with Lord Stark's son and bastard, to go on a last-minute hunt in the woods surrounding Winterfell. They were to finally leave Winterfell. Cersei wanted to disappear from the old northern castle and bask in the warmth that the South always held. He was finding the North to grow dreary, and worse, the longer they stayed, the courtyard was filled with life, men and women stuffing baggage back onto the royal carriage, and her remaining children stuffed away with the baggage. Cersei sighed, resting her hand on her chest as she sat within the carriage, her green eyes trailing over the gray and dull colors of the castle, finding every bit of the castle to be an eyesore. Compared to the vibrant colors of the South, it seems that her husband and Lord Stark were still gone hunting for something. Cersei frowned. Her husband and his obsessions with taking the life from the world around them, it was that or drinking the rest of the world dry of its alcohol and wine, neither of which were any good for a healthy relationship. Cersei took a deep breath. After everything that had happened recently, she was willing to try and mend their love-less relationship. She was going to do it for the sake of her son. He was to marry a girl he was already deeply besotted with, fulfilling the dream that his father couldn't fulfill. Cersei wanted to make sure that nothing would turn Naruto into the sick monster that his father had become. As the boy grew up, she took a deep breath and laid her head against her headrest. A lion preyed on the stag. She knew exactly what she had to do to get Robert under wing to fall in love with him. She frowned, not really looking forward to it, but if it was going to seem like a good example to set for Naruto, then she was willing to do whatever it took. Her thoughts fell back to her eldest. Joffrey had never been so hurt. The boy didn't seem very ecstatic at the news that his father was intending to take him and his brother out to hunt with the Starks. Joffrey was very spiteful. Since the revelation of the change of marriage, he didn't even give his own mother a look of respect, not even one of anger. He simply didn't look at her, and that broke her heart. She didn't care if he was a bit of a challenge to deal with. His unbridled hatred towards anyone and everyone was beginning to break her heart. That deep glare he gave her in passing was enough to shatter her already guilty heart. She took a deep breath and continued to stare from her carriage with a blank look on her face. The dreariness of the North was beginning to dig into her skin. She shut her eyes in boredom, finding the momentary darkness to be of more interest than the gray of Winterfell. Naruto sat with a great smile on his face. Two tusks were tied together into a necklace resting on his shoulders and his neck. The others around him were covered in blood, but thankfully that blood belonged to no man. They managed to get lucky and find a herd of boar and deer drinking water from a pond in the woods. The hunting party saw the chance and took it while Joffrey was unhorsed. Within seconds of finding the perfect hunt, Naruto purposely jumped off of his horse and drew his blade, taking down the largest stag first and taking on the largest boar. Naruto defeated the two of them easily enough. He not only wore the tusks as a necklace, he turned the antlers into a helmet reminiscent to his father's old helmet. During his rebellion, behind them 2 boars and 3 stags were dragged along on 3 different sleds. Robert clapped Naruto on his back, nearly forcing the boy from his saddle. Jamie then did the same, resting his hand on Naruto's shoulder, and even ruffled his hair, congratulating him for his fearlessness. Ned was even impressed, finding it a courtesy to congratulate him, even though the other 2 said all that he could possibly say. Rob and John were greatly impressed with his style of hunting. He charged at his target almost as if that target was wielding their own sword or pike. He fought them as if they were human as well, giving them the chance to defend themselves. Rob at first was completely aghast with the idea of charging into a hunt like that, but then remembered that if it were any other man doing what Naruto had done, they'd be torn asunder. Besides, what man other than Naruto can cut clean through another sword? Rob definitely knew no other. Finding what Naruto had done a simple act compared to his previous antics, the Stark was for the first time jealous of someone else. He looked at Naruto with 2 parts adoration and 1 part envy. Even John felt the same towards Naruto. The blonde was just too great at everything pertaining to fighting. Under normal circumstances, Bran would have been with them, but Naruto felt it best that he spend time packing and saying goodbye to those in the Stark household, namely their mother Rickon and Maester Luwin. Naruto would definitely have loved to have Bran at his side and help hunt with the boy as his squire, but the boy was still very young, and from the looks Lady Caitlin had given the king and Ned, she was very against sending Bran south as well. Naruto would have asked his father to reconsider, but Naruto knew that Bran wanted to be a knight for as long as the young Stark could. Remember, Bran's ultimate goal was to become a knight in the Kingsguard and not a Lord of Winterfell, so the troop was heading back to the castle to head south. Some of the more vocal Lannister and Baratheon men-at-arms were ecstatic to be returning south, tired of the north. Some began to talk about the beauty and the smooth feeling of summer in the south. Naruto tightened his hold on the reins. Sansa would love the south. He already had an entire plan of what to do for the girl when they arrived in King's Landing, of course, should Lord Stark permit it. Naruto felt his smile grow as the gates of Winterfell began to come in closer and closer. Stark banners waved in the soft winds as they whisked past him, pressing against his skin with a sweet caress. The hooves of his horse trampled and clomped softly against the stone gateway and into the dirt courtyard where the rest of the royal entourage was waiting. Lannisters and Baratheons were on their way, mounting up onto the backs of their horses. Naruto Watched as Rob slid off the back of his horse with a small frown on his face. Naruto did the same despite having to leave real soon. The blonde gave Rob a small smile and quickly embraced his quick friend. Rob tightened his hold on Naruto. Please promise that you'll watch over my sisters, Rob whispered. I trust you to look after them, I promise, Rob. Naruto pulled away and shook hands with Rob before mounting up again and rode over to the royal carriage. To check on his baggage, John dismounted his own horse and hugged his half-brother tightly for one last embrace before he too took off. But instead of south, he went further north to take the black with the Night's Watch. Winterfell had suddenly never felt so boring, so empty in Rob's life. This castle, his home, was always filled with so much life and activity. He just couldn't imagine that the day would come so soon when his family would be split up and sent every which way. Arya walked out dressed in her northern dress before she was forcibly placed into the Hand's carriage, which was nothing more than a carriage that personally belonged to Lord Stark. Arya fought back, of course, wanting to ride on her own horse like Bran was, only to be quickly shot down by her father. Naruto sighed softly and continued to tighten the ropes wrapped around their personal baggage, making sure that the ties weren't loose or weak. At the knots, Arya was still fighting back, this time against her strict septa. The old woman was trying to keep Arya in check and under control. Nymeria was scratching her ear with a small yawn escaping the direwolf's mouth. Naruto wiped his hands in relief when the ropes were finally secured. He hopped back onto his horse and watched as Bran appeared with his direwolf at his side, both of them excited as ever to be heading south. I got a new sword, Naruto. Bran smiled and drew his blade, only to reveal about 5 inches. Even then the blade glinted beautifully in the light of the gray early morning sun above them. It was a short sword, but it seemed modified to fit Bran's small and lithe form. A time was going to come when the young Stark would become a knight and bear armor of his house, and soon enough don the golden armor and white cloak of the Kingsguard. Bran nodded at Naruto and rode ahead of him to talk with Arya or to pester Sansa. Naruto took one last look at Winterfell and gave the place a small smile. Before turning his head to the front gate of Winterfell, there was a small gasp heard coming from some of the nobles that came along with them to the north. The prince turned his head to face the source of their surprise and dropped the reins from his grasp. Sansa was walking up to the Hand's carriage, but she was dressed in a vibrant yellow and black northerner dress, clearly taking up the House Baratheon colors, while keeping 2 ribbons of green and white wrapped in her hair. She wore a southerner hairstyle, accentuating her red hair and allowing her icy blue eyes view for all to see. At her side, lady had a collar around her neck with a leash leading from her neck and into Sansa's hands. The two walked towards the carriage, gaining the eyes of everyone present. I can't believe how perfect things are turning out to be, Naruto thought to himself. I can't wait until our wedding. 2 weeks had passed and they were just about to cross from Moat Cailin and into the Trident. Memories began to rush into the Hand's mind. To see the land so peaceful and not reeking of rotting flesh was a sight to see. Images began to appear of a time filled with turmoil and war. He could still see thousands of men and horses charging into battle, with many of them not returning to their homes. The sounds of battle rung in his ears, the screams, the roars, the clashing metal. Suddenly Robert clapped his old friend on the back, immediately snapping the Stark from his heart-wrenching reminiscence. The two talked amongst each other and the convoy took a stop to the side of the King's Road. In tables were set up with a vast array of food and drink were laid out. Ned, Robert said in between sips of his wine, look at this place, beautiful and simply ripe for exploration. It does seem nice, your grace, Ned replied, taking a bite of his roasted chicken. Come on, Ned, Robert laughed, we're alone here, enough with the pleasantries. What do you say, the two of us, swords at our sides, horses beneath us, and no one to tell us otherwise. Look, our children are already going at it. Robert let out a bellowing laugh, and true to his word, 3 horses came rushing by, clomping in the grassy field around them, racing to nowhere in particular. On the lead horse there was a golden trail mixing with a longer, wilder trail of red. Ned and Robert watched as Naruto and Sansa on the same horse rode through the grass and jumped over rocks and fences, while turning back around to hear the giggling and the laughter roaring from both Arya and Bran. They raced back and forth, kicking both dirt and grass in their wake. Instead of eating, the 4 of them decided to have fun. Beneath them, though, 3 direwolves that were clearly beginning to grow in size were chasing after them, tongues hanging out to feel the wind in their faces. Anyway, Ned, Robert's side news came up from across the narrow sea. Ned lifted the small roll of paper with a nervous hand. He immediately felt a great deal of disgust dig into his gut. Daenerys Targaryen has married a Dothraki horse lord, Robert said with a glare. Are you serious, Robert? Ned asked with a frown. You're worried about a child? A child with an army of savages at her back, Robert corrected. We can only hope that she won't turn her sights across the narrow sea, but knowing her weasel of a brother Viserys, he'll probably be filling her mind with the idea of conquering Westeros. She's only a child, Robert, Ned replied with a tone that spoke no argument. Later that night they came to a stop at an inn along the King's Road. Ned, though, couldn't sleep, his eyes watched the night scene of the countryside of Westeros, admiring the foliage and the various trees that popped up amidst the fields of grass. Water rushed alongside the camp, flowing up and down thanks to the various rivers in the riverlands, but there was a specific river that they were close to, a river that he knew Robert would probably be at, despite the man that was forcefully laid to rest within the bank of the ford. Ned stood staring at the starry night, the glimmer they held reminding him of diamonds and precious gems, but thoughts returning to the ford, the Ruby Ford as it was called. It was the place that his good friend Robert Baratheon slew Rhaegar Targaryen, the last dragon. The rubies from his chest plate were pried from their sockets when Robert's warhammer caved the Targaryen's armor, and Ned could remember the image as if it happened just an hour ago. The sight of that many rubies flying out earned the once nameless river the Ruby Ford. Ned shut his eyes, the battle replaying before him. 10,000 Dornishmen rushed in to aid them at the last moment, but it was futile, and the battle was won in the end. Ned took a deep breath and sighed, resting his fists on the inn's porch beams. Lord Stark, a voice came from behind Prince Naruto. Ned said with a small smile on his face, "Why are you awake at this time?" "I don't know," Naruto sighed. "I was having another dream and woke up with blood on my pillow again. It happens every once." "Have you spoken to a maester about it?" Ned asked. "Gods no," Naruto replied with a sheepish rub of his head. "A maester wouldn't understand what I am going through anyway." "Lord Stark, if you don't mind me asking, what are you doing up this late?" "Nothing, young Prince," Ned replied with a smile. "I'm simply staring off into the night." "Do you know where we are?" "Of course," Naruto nodded. "We're in the Trident, the place where you and my father battled and defeated Prince Rhaegar, slaying him in the Ruby Ford." "Everyone knows this story, even small folk in Flea Bottom." "My Prince," Naruto. Ned placed a hand on the blonde's shoulder. "Your father is out there in the Ruby Ford paying his respects to the men who died and most likely cursing Rhaegar while he's over there, knowing the man he never did get over his hatred for the Targaryens." "Why?" Naruto asked. "I was always too afraid to ask him, and whenever I'd ask Mother she'd avoid my questions and replace them with her own. Maybe it's a story for another time, Prince Naruto," Ned replied after a long pause. "You should get some sleep. 3 weeks have passed since the Trident," and Naruto was already beginning to worry. Joffrey hadn't been seen often outside of breaks and eating. He was off, always riding ahead or even in the royal carriage, trying his best to avoid anyone and everyone. While Naruto was at first glad that his brother hadn't shown his face, he was now starting to grow weary without Joff's annoying presence. He needed someone to make his day bad, and Joffrey always found a way to do so. To have 1 week without Joffrey's presence was a gift from the gods. 2 weeks without Joffrey was still great, but starting to get old. 3 weeks without Joffrey annoying him, asking him for something, or even just being seen was starting to get to the boy who'd spent his entire life looking at for and being with his older brother. Until recent years, of course, the direwolves seemed to be at peace with Joffrey out of their presence. Strangely, Naruto even managed to get his mother to play with them despite her fear of the wolves. Bran's direwolf, though, wouldn't go near Cersei, bringing his face to meet with hers, his eyes boring holes into her face, scaring her every time. Nymeria and Lady were jewels and loved Cersei, licking her hands, cheeks and neck before being forced to calm down and let the queen breathe. Naruto was definitely going to get to the bottom of why Bran's direwolf was so hostile to his mother. Not even Bran could understand it, and constantly tried to get his still nameless direwolf to show Cersei the same kindness he'd shown everyone else, each attempt to no avail. When Sansa was with Naruto and Cersei decided to ride up with Robert and have intimate conversations with the king, Lady would follow her like a lost puppy. Cersei and Robert would look back occasionally and burst into laughter when Lady would try to hide with a dopey look on her large face. Tommen and Myrcella were attached to Nymeria as if Nymeria was their own. Arya, of course, was a bit tense at the idea but decided to stick with the other prince and the only princess. Unbeknownst to Naruto, Lord Stark would give him small glances filled with both pride and joy. Ned deep within felt that none of this could happen if Naruto wasn't the way he was. Without Naruto, Ned couldn't even dare to imagine what kind of things would have happened. Ned watched his oldest friend talk with his Lannister wife in a civilized manner, neither of them yelling or arguing, and the Stark was glad that Robert didn't say anything about Lyanna. Those who knew that nothing good came out of the king and queen's relationship when Lyanna Stark was mentioned even in passing. But suddenly the king burst into bellowing laughter, with Cersei letting out her own genuine laughs behind them. Sir Jaime was simply enjoying the view. A pleased grin was on his face, strange since Ned could have sworn that whenever Robert was with Cersei, Jaime would always scowl or look uncomfortable. That was no matter. Ned shook his head. All that mattered now was the silence and the happiness that took place among the people of this royal convoy. But back to Naruto. The boy was worried. His left hand was wrapped around Sansa's waist, holding her tight as they rode together, his right hand holding onto the reins with a tight grip. Next to him, Bran was riding along, but when a great yawn escaped his direwolf immediately yawned as well, bringing a small giggle from both Sansa and Naruto. Bran gave a sheepish laugh and stared off into the bright light of the rising sun. Bran felt great unexplainable warmth which can only be described as summer. Bran froze and even pulled the reins on his horse as Direwolf trudged forward, though entranced by the bright light of the sun. "I know what I'm naming you, boy," Bran cheered and rode up to his Direwolf with excitement. "You're going to be Summer." A new voice came from behind. "Well, I guess I should have enjoyed the silence a bit longer." Naruto sighed. What a stupid name for a dog. Joffrey's voice sounded echoing in Naruto's ears. "Direwolf dog, they're the exact same." Joffrey. Naruto glared. "Can you please not be an ass on such a good morning?" "Shut it, Naruto." Joffrey glared, his green eyes burning bloodshot. "I don't want to hear your stupid voice this early." Joffrey. Robert's voice echoed with a dark undertone. "Apologize to your brother and his squire this instant." Joffrey gave a look to his mother but immediately felt betrayal. His mother was always on his side. When his father would get angry like this, his mother was always on his side whenever anyone got mad at him, but this time she was giving Joffrey the same look as King Robert was. The prince gripped the reins of his horse with a deepening glare growing on his face. Joffrey took a deep breath and faced Naruto and nearly felt the urge to draw his sword and carve into the boy's face. Naruto looked at him with an innocent face, almost as if he didn't understand what was happening. Joffrey knew that Naruto knew what was going on. Joffrey gritted his teeth and spat out his apology before turning and riding off ahead, knowing the way from here to King's Landing. Cersei and Robert took a deep breath and leaned back in their saddles, resting their palms on their faces. Sansa's face was red with complete disgust. She couldn't believe that she used to like Joffrey more than Naruto. She took a deep breath and leaned into Naruto as they rode at the same pace as the royal convoy. Naruto didn't know it, but Cersei and Robert were stealing glances at the two and at how peaceful they were. Robert sighed in disgust and looked at the fading form of Joffrey as he rode ahead. The Baratheon king looked to his old friend and frowned deeply. Robert scratched his beard and looked to Cersei. "Ned, I can't believe a child like Joffrey came from my seed." Robert growled. "Can you really believe that I'd create a child like that, Ned?" Immediately both Cersei and Jaime froze, albeit momentarily. Jaime looked away and down toward Naruto, and Cersei looked away to the woods surrounding the King's Road. Neither Lannister spoke, but King Robert took notice. He immediately resting his right hand on Cersei's shoulder and for some strange reason gave his Lannister queen a small smile. Cersei's eyes widened with surprise as she rested her hand on his large hand. Robert immediately let go and looked ahead, clearly not entirely sure with what he was trying to get at. Ned, though, felt a small smile grow on his face as the road to King's Landing was no longer going to be an awkward encounter. And for that the Stark was thankful. "Would you be any different if you were mine?" Naruto. Jaime thought with a deepening frown. "This is surprising. No smart remarks or jokes. I can't believe that I'm saying this, but I'm glad that Naruto isn't mine. He could have ended up just as bad as Joffrey, or even worse, or turn into recluses like Tommen and Myrcella." Naruto. "I'm glad that you're nothing like your brother, and I'm glad that you're still up and kicking. I don't know what I would have done if you didn't survive. To hell with if you remembered what you saw. As long as you're okay." "Bloody hell, why are we stopping already?" Jaime asked, his horse bumping in Ser Barristan's horse. The Hand's carriage lost an axle. They finally got everything together and the royal convoy was finally coming within the city borders. Farmlands spread out far and wide from the great vermilion walls of King's Landing and the even greater Crimson Keep that towered over much of the city from Aegon's high hill situated at the edge of the cliff overlooking the beach of Blackwater Bay. Sansa gasped at the sheer beauty of the great city and pointed excitedly, getting Naruto's attention on the matter. It had been almost 5 hours since Joffrey decided to ride off, and they all hoped that he made it to King's Landing unscathed. The king let out a sigh of relief and laughed with Cersei as the city came into view. The two immediately began to talk with one another, making plans, and thanks to Ned's input, they were simply going to rest in their chambers. Things were beginning to look up, and Naruto managed to have enough influence to bring his parents together. He held Sansa tight and slapped the reins on his horse, shooting forward. Bran and Arya laughed, and with echoing whistles Nymeria and Summer rushed after their masters. Cersei and Robert stopped when they realized that only 2 direwolves were seen running. Cersei looked down to see Lady looking with adorable eyes, almost as if she was asking Cersei if she could go and join them. The queen smiled softly at the little wolf, and Lady shot out with the same speed as her littermates had. Cersei turned to her brother and gave him a small smile, to which he returned and nodded his head to her husband, surprising the queen. Jaime gave her a small smirk and turned his gaze back to the Red City. "Things are really beginning to look up, aren't they?" Cersei thought with a growing smile. "Aren't they? Time skip 5 days since the arrival in King's Landing." The entire northern entourage of Ned Stark was let in on the plans of a tourney dedicated to the Stark. Ned was surprised at the notion at first, but after a few days of preparation the tourney was to begin on this day. Despite Ned's wishes against one, Ned was stressed as the Hand of the King, finding that most of the money was diverted to feasts, hunts and tournaments. All three were sucking money from the royal coffers, bleeding the Iron Throne dry of money, putting the throne in debt. Ned was stressed. It wasn't the fact that the throne was in debt that made him stressed. It was who the throne was indebted to. Ned sat on his seat trying his best to be as calm as possible. The Lannisters were in control of almost all of the gold in the entire continent. Of course King's Landing would be taking loans, but to think millions of gold dragons poured into such useless extravagances made Ned's blood boil. It made the Stark wonder with a burning hole in his brain what Robert was doing as the king. A man can only take so much from others. That much is true, and Ned Stark has proven himself to be a tough, resilient man to things that don't go his way. But the sniveling men on the small council were enough to give him his fill of plots and corruption. Every time any of them opened their mouths, Ned frowned. Maybe not Pycelle, he was just an old fool, but Lord Baelish Littlefinger, Lord Varys the Spider, and of course Lord Renly, Robert's younger brother. The three of them plotted separately, always plotting, always wanting something from someone. To think that Lord Baelish would even try to talk to Sansa made Ned's skin crawl. Ned had to watch himself around here even with his wife's warnings and pleads. The Stark couldn't help himself. His children were here. He wanted to set a good example for them, to keep them from the corruption and the deceit. He wanted to keep them from the ridiculous game that is the Game of Thrones. He had a small conversation about the game with Cersei one morning in her solar. She was pleasant compared to the other times they'd talked, but the conversation turned into talks of politics, plotting placement in the Kingsguard who'll take certain key city official placements. The Stark was confused through most of this talk until she spoke to him, describing to him the Game of Thrones, the game he unintentionally got him and his family into. He shut his eyes and rested his palms against his tired eyes and scratched at his long black hair. So tiring, and only 5 days have passed. A wolf trapped in a pit of snakes. The man took a deep breath, but a smile began to grow on his face. Speaking of wolves, Nymeria, Lady, and Summer were all growing at a spontaneous rate. Their furs were gorgeous and looked completely new to the people of King's Landing. Their size was strange and caught the eyes of various people when they'd tour the city. At first Ned was fearful that someone would try and poach one of the direwolves, but thank the gods none were ever threatened. He took a deep breath and began to reminisce. He was especially glad about one certain relationship. The king and queen. Of course Ned smiled brightly. His best and oldest friend Robert Baratheon was finally beginning to learn what it's like to finally feel what it is to love his wife, even though what he feels can't be classified as love yet. It was a start. Ned saw Robert and Cersei walking arm with arm through the castle halls, having never done that except on their wedding ceremony. Ned nearly had to do a double take when he saw them talking in peace, Cersei's shoulder resting on the king's shoulder, a peaceful smile on her face, a peaceful smile on Robert's pudgy extremity. And to think what brought the two together was the near death of their son. Naruto had caught Ned's eye. He was just so bloody different. The boy would visit Sansa whenever he could, and so far Sansa's been with him more than she's been embroidering. The two would leave early in the morning and arrive just before dusk, bellies full, the smell of light wine on their breaths, and big smiles spread across their faces. If it were any other man that did what Naruto and Sansa might be doing, Ned would be worried and immediately force the man to cease conversation with his daughter, but for some reason Naruto gave off an air of respect. An undeniable amount of trust was already felt between him and the Stark household. Of course he was still nervous about the two always being together, but he allowed it nevertheless. Suddenly the sound of heavy clomping of hooves brought his mind from his never-ending thoughts. In the arena stood Naruto and Sansa. They jumped off their horse and walked towards the stands. The two were laughing about something, and Ned could distinctly hear Sansa being the one to make him laugh yet again, bringing more trust from Naruto. The boy was bringing the best out of his children. Ned turned his icy blue eyes down to the arena again and found Bran running after them. Lady and Summer on leashes. Ned chortled softly at the implications of Bran being made the wolf handler since he was Naruto's squire, a cruel use for the boy since he was still too young and live to be bearing armor, but not far from the truth, knowing Arya and Sansa and how they love to pester their younger siblings. Hello father, Sansa said, taking a seat next to the Stark. Where's Arya? She's having dancing lessons, Ned replied. She won't be joining us here. Oh, Sansa was aghast. I would have thought that Arya of all the people would want to be here. Prepare to be surprised even more, Sansa, Bran said while petting Summer. And Lady, she told me this morning that she was going to have dancing classes and didn't have time for a stupid tourney. Then she slammed the door in my face. Really? Sansa asked with wide eyes. I know, Bran said with glare while rubbing Summer's head. I can't believe she'd slam the door in my face like that. Actually I can, but what? Sansa said with a questioning look on her face. No one cares if she slammed a door in your face, Bran. Everyone would slam a door in your face. I was Sansa. Ned interrupted. Don't be so harsh on your little brother. But father, Sansa gave him a pleading look after her father gave her a gaze that spoke no argument. She sighed in defeat. Fine, I'm sorry, Bran. It's all right, Sansa, the young Stark replied with a smile. I was just having a poke at fun. Well, my lady. Sansa. Naruto kissed her hand and began to walk away. Naruto. Sansa gave him a pleading look Lord Baelish was sitting in front of her. "Where are you going?" "I'm royalty, Sansa. I have to sit with the royal family," the boy replied with a smile. "I'm your betrothed," Sansa said suddenly. "I'm going to take a seat with you." She lifted her dress and stepped over the long bench and began to follow after the beaming blonde. Naruto had a small smile on his face. While what she was doing was technically not allowed, he shrugged, wondering where such a rule even exists. After all, he didn't know any other story of a woman sitting with her betrothed. After all, a woman's betrothed would normally be down there performing in the tourney. The boy walked over ready to grab a chair, but the king's squire Lancel Lannister immediately decided that he'd try and do his job, reaching down trying to lift the heavy Verwood chair to no avail. Naruto wanted to stop him, but to see such a scrawny girlish man try and move a chair made from the heaviest wood in Westeros made him want to break into laughter. Groan. In Dorne, the tree was bloody heavy and used to make the furniture they had in the palace. Because of its weight, the wood was only available to those that had money to afford it. The boy, tired of Lancel's struggles bringing embarrassment to House Lannister, decided to do it himself. Just as originally planned, the boy wrapped his arm around the chair and channeled his power, darkening his blue eyes to a navy blue hue. He raised the chair, faking the struggle, and plopped the Verwood chair next to his own next to Joffrey's vacant seat. Naruto gave a frown at the sight. His brother was being a little child, not leaving his room other than for food and drink or to use his chamber pot. The Baratheon looked in disgust, not enjoying what the empty seat could be implying. "Naruto," Robert suddenly said, getting his and Sansa's attention. "Since your foolish brother Joffrey decided not to show up, how would you like to sit in his chair and Sansa can take yours?" "I'd love to." Naruto beamed at his father and mother. The boy lifted Sansa from her seat, bringing a yelp from the Stark. Before resting the girl in her seat, Cersei gave them a small glance, feeling her lips tug at the corners. Robert was doing the same and rested his hand on Cersei's with a small show of care. The queen's green eyes looked at him, a strange glimmer in them that Robert hadn't seen since their wedding night. The man didn't know what to do, but he let his lips curl up. His bloody son was doing this to him. Robert surmised softly the damned boy was turning him into a sappy, fat but happy man. To think that Cersei was beginning to willingly try in their relationship surprised the Baratheon. The man continued to think on it, carelessly rubbing his thumb against Cersei's hand on her golden crust armrest, his blue eyes trailing over to Sansa and Naruto again. They were talking like they always did, learning more about each other, growing closer in a way that the Baratheon wished he did with Lyanna, a Stark that he himself wanted. He shut his eyes and leaned his head back into his seat, but he shut his eyes and shut his mind, concentrating on the sound of his son and his betrothed talk. Their conversation was about life and death, love and hate. Strange topics to be talking about, but nonetheless they still talked about it, showing a deeper level of intellect they hid from common knowledge. But there was something that rung in Robert's ears that Naruto said to the girl: "In the world we live in, it's uncertain that I'll live to see tomorrow or even live to see the sun set. But if something were to ever happen, move on, live happily, live peacefully, find someone else to love and hold you. I'm gone, but you're not. You still have your life to live. Grieve, but don't let it be the only thing you do." Robert thought, repeating the boy's words over and over. "Gods, what have I done to have a child like that? To come from my seed seems almost impossible, that a child like that can come from me after everything that I've done. Fucking whores, drinking myself to depression, eating like the fat man I am. Where in the gods did the boy get something like that?" "Naruto, where'd you get that from?" Robert asked. "It's actually something I've made up on my own," Naruto said truthfully. "I've been reading a lot lately whenever I'm not doing any of my princely duties or with Sansa. I'm reading. You should try it sometime, Father Bar." Robert waved his hand in dismissal. "Stuff it, clever little shit." Cersei gave him a look of disgust, but she heard Naruto's laughter boom in a very Baratheon-esque way. Robert had a little gleam in his eye that Cersei hadn't seen in ages. Robert burst into his own bit of laughter. Naruto and Robert shared a small look and nodded in silence, smiles still burning into their faces. Naruto ran a hand through his blonde hair and faced his red-haired lady and wrapped his arm around Sansa's shoulders, and the girl leaned into him. The tourney was about to begin. Knights were about to start filling in for the opening fights, beginning with the melee. Naruto looked to Bran and nodded to the boy and looked around. His mother and father were too interested in each other. "Sansa, I have to go and piss," Naruto said flatly. "I'll be back soon though." "All right," Sansa said with a worried look on her face, but she watched as Bran took off running without Summer. "Have you? What is this fool planning?" Naruto and Bran quickly hid in Robert's tent. The blonde was sweating and wanted to do this as fast as possible. The Stark of the two rushed back and forth, tossing Naruto pieces of armor, all the while Naruto with lightning fast speed clasped around his body, wrapped around his body, and finally tying his belt around his waist, giving his sword and sheath a place to rest. Naruto took a deep breath as Bran tossed him a great helm to cover his face. Naruto nodded at the Stark and pulled his hair back before sliding the great helm over him. "I want you ready to give me my lance once The joust comes, Naruto said. Have my horse at the ready and my lance in secret. If you can climb and not be seen, you can get those things and not be seen. I'm counting on you, Bran. Got it. Naruto. Bran stood straight and shot from the tent to join his father and the direwolves. Naruto barged from the tent, taking a quick look at his surroundings, and headed over to the arena field for the melee. He was dressed in a dark red leather hauberk with large stylized pauldrons on his shoulders protecting everything on his upper arms. His helmet, though, had small staghorns that could have a chance of revealing who he is. A prince should never compete in the tourney, since some knights would be fearful of the king's wrath should the prince die from the strenuous combat that they go through during the tourneys. Naruto wasn't intending to die, though. He was intending to win and named Sansa as Queen of Love and Beauty. The boy took a deep breath and entered the arena, a shaky breath leaving his lips. The competition came in all shapes and sizes and cultures. There were bravos, traveling swordsmen, hedge knights, noble, knightly, loyal to the crown lords of the Crownlands, and even a few men that Naruto didn't recognize, such as the man standing with a scimitar at his side, clearly coming from Essos. Naruto stood next to the largest man present. It was none other than Ser Gregor, the mountain Clegane. Naruto's body shivered involuntarily as his blue eyes trailed over the man's terrifying stature. To believe that his grandfather used him to slaughter Rieger's children and wife made Naruto nervous to be fighting someone like him in the melee. Of course, that theory that his grandfather ordered Ser Gregor was commonly believed to be a lie, but Naruto could tell otherwise. He knew the truth behind the reigns of Castamere and how his grandfather annihilated House Rain and House Tarbeck, tearing down their keeps and slaughtering every member. So to think that his grandfather would use someone like Ser Gregor to murder the children of Rieger Targaryen wasn't too much of a stretch. Naruto shivered softly and started walking around, taking his place against the wall of the arena. The horn was about to be blown soon, and he would have to beat or kill these men. There were a few men with mounts, but that was for those who could afford to have a mount. Naruto took a deep breath and waited for the horn. 20,000 gold dragons to whoever wins the melee. Naruto smirked and took a deep breath, not really wanting to do it for the gold. Decided at that moment to donate the gold to the orphanage in Flea Bottom, and if he wins everything else, even more for the orphanage. He took another deep breath, trying to calm his beating heart. He knew that Sansa was probably wondering where he was at this point, but the horn was blown. All men rushed ahead, clashing swords with others' axes, clashing against steel plate, sparks coming to life. Horses rushed about, with their riders swinging about, trying to knock men over. Naruto ducked when two men sellswords rushed at him from two different directions. He shot around, punching one of the men in the throat, and came back around, kicking the other in the knee, and bashed his head against the wooden wall behind him, knocking the both of them out. Naruto sped ahead, finally showing himself for all to see. The man with the stag helm was bringing a lot of people's attention, Robert especially. Naruto jumped over a low swing from an axe-wielding sellsword and kicked the men back as he flew through the air. Naruto elbowed the man in his temple, knocking him over, and pushed the man in front of a racing horse. The prince winced beneath his helmet at the bone-crushing impact. A roar was heard coming from his right and his left, perking Naruto's ears. The boy drew two knives and hurled the first towards the spear-wielding hedge knight, hitting him in his shoulder just at the joint. Naruto ducked under another spear and grabbed onto the shaft, glaring at the hedge knight who dared to attack him. Naruto stared at him and decided to knock him out, head-butting his helmet against the man's, denting his own into his forehead. Naruto nonchalantly dropped the unconscious fighter and headed off, sheathing his knife and drawing his sword. Naruto wanted to be as fast with this as possible. He shot forward, clashing his blade with a bravosi, but the foreigner's superior sword skill put the prince at a disadvantage. The bravosi spun around, causing Naruto's weight to push him forward and nearly run into someone's spear. Naruto quickly turned on his heel, swinging with precision at the various parts of the bravosi's defense, trying to find a weak point in his supposed perfect defense. He wasn't even using a shield. The bravosi lunged forward, his thin blade piercing Naruto's helm, but thankfully missing his skin. Naruto smirked though when he realized that the bravosi made a mistake. Turning his head, the blade flew out of the bravosi's hand, leaving the Asosi open for any attack. Naruto grabbed him by his collar and bashed the sword but against the bravosi's temple, knocking the smaller man unconscious immediately. He looked up to see Sansa gasp in surprise at what he'd done. Hopefully she didn't know who he was yet. He pushed the unconscious bravosi off of his body and jumped back, dodging the riders racing back and forth. Naruto glared and huffed, realizing that he'd made a mistake by not taking his bloody horse along. There was nothing but riders and Ser Gregor on foot. Naruto really wanted a mount, by now growing frustrated with the way his remaining opponents were on horseback. A rider came up to him, sword drawn, ready to strike him down. Naruto smirked beneath his helmet, the perfect target. Naruto drew out his knife and hurled the blade at his opponent. Seconds later the man fell from his horse, a knife embedded in his right shoulder, his sword arm. Naruto waited for the horse to come to him. He took a deep breath, power radiating within his arms and legs. The reins were waving wildly as time began to slow. Naruto smirked. He was beginning to control his powers better. He reached out, gripping the reins, and jumped, bringing his leg over the saddle. Once time came back to normal, people were roaring out for Naruto, no one knowing his true name, simply calling him Stag Helm. Naruto drew his sword and charged over for Sir Greater. The supposed knight was charging at the Baratheon, ready to strike his horse down, but once again time began to slow for Naruto, giving him enough time to deal with the situation. His eyes darkened into a deep navy blue hue as his power grew within his sword arm. Sir Greater was a bastard in every way, and Naruto surely didn't want to deal with him in the joust. Naruto swung with all of his might at the charging giant, with a roar sounding eerily familiar to Robert and Cersei. Naruto carved into the great helm, the mountain service, digging his blade into the man's face, knocking him from the fight. People were in uproar, wondering who this man was. They cheered his name, getting the attention of the other competitors. Naruto gritted his teeth. His opponents turned their attention to him and him alone. Robert stood from his seat, and Naruto immediately knew that his father figured him out. Cersei glared at him almost as if she was about to scream at him. Naruto looked down, sighing in defeat. Of course his bloody parents would figure him out. I'll increase the reward for whoever knocks his helmet from his face. Robert roared 50,000 gold dragons to the one strong enough to forcefully reveal the Stag Helm's face. Naruto's blue eyes widened with fear. His father was trying to teach him a lesson. His mother pulled Robert back into his seat and immediately began to argue with him. Sansa's face turning red when she too realized what was going on. She looked at him with pleading eyes, giving knowing glances at how many opponents he was about to face. At the same time, Sansa sighed and sat straight, ready for whatever surprising trick Naruto had up his sleeve. Robert and Cersei, though, immediately started laughing, making Naruto's skin run cold. The two of them looked at Naruto and gave him a small nod. The boy's jaw dropped and his head began to shake. His parents caught on, but instead of stopping the fight, they let it continue. Begin. Robert roared. 18 mounted warriors, including that associate that Naruto was curious about. 18 men charged at him, most wielding swords, others wielded spears, and in the associate's case a scimitar. Naruto charged ahead too, knowing that the ones in his immediate vicinity were swordsmen. Channeling his power again, Naruto swung his sword, digging the blade into the first man's gut, launching him from his saddle. The boy ducked back, his amazing agility holding nothing back. The other man's sword trailed above him at a hair's length, nearly lopping his head off. Naruto pulled on the reins, turning around, charging after the remaining 17 men. He sheathed his sword when a spear-wielding knight began to rush for him, ready to spear his horse. Time slowed and Naruto bent over, surprising many by his new trick. Naruto, though, channeled his power once again, bringing strength to his legs. The spear came in faster than the boy anticipated, cutting into his arm. Naruto growled in pain, but wrapped his hand around the spear shaft, diverting his power to his arms, strengthening them. Time froze for him and Naruto snapped the spear shaft in half, spinning the broken spear in his hands. Time went back to normal and the knight froze in confusion at his lack of a spearhead. He turned around, looking through his open visored sowlet, only to see Naruto wielding his spearhead. Naruto shook his head hidden beneath his stag helm and hurled the spear at the knight's back, forcing him from the fight. 16 more to go and Naruto was starting to leave an impression on the small folk and the king. Naruto could see Sansa shaking in her seat, her hands held up to her lips. She was watching his every move, fearful that he might make a mistake. She watched in awe as he dispatched another 3 knights with relative ease and still had enough energy to continue fighting the rest. She looked to Bran, Naruto's accomplice in all of this, and gave him a glare. It was a good thing that Bran didn't look back. If looks could kill, Bran would be in the deepest pit of the 7 hells. Sansa looked over to her right to see Cersei and Robert whispering about something. King Throne Joffrey. Sansa could only hear those 3 words. What in the blazes are they talking about, little bird? Cersei said, suddenly gaining Sansa's attention as Naruto unhorsed 2 more knights. Come over, I have a question for you. Anything, your grace. Call me your good mother. Cersei gave her a calm smile. How do you feel about Naruto? Sansa was caught off guard by the question. What do you mean, your grace? How do you feel about my son? Cersei asked again. I want to know. Sansa bit her lip and nearly jumped when the crowd exploded when the stag helm unhorsed yet another knight. He's better than anything I could have imagined. Fight harder. Robert's roars were heard. Cersei let out a sigh, but Sansa started to giggle. The crowd roared along with him as the stag helm unhorsed 3 knights within 3 seconds. This is my son, Robert cheered within his mind. This is what a king should be like. This is who the king should be. Bahaha. The way he fights is unlike anything I've ever seen. Suddenly 5 more knights were unhorsed, groaning in pain, writhing on the arena floor. Naruto thought was starting to daze. His vision began to blur and he became droopy. Naruto took a deep breath, feeling the blood flow from his head wound. Naruto was starting to feel his breath get heavy. He leaned his head down, resting his palm against the saddle of his horse. He kept his sword up though to defend himself at a moment's notice should his opponents decide to charge him. All that remained for him to fight were just 3 more knights. The associate though finally tossed his broadsword and drew his scimitar, showing off its shiny steel for all to see with a flick of his wrist, though the sword exploded into green flame, bringing fearful gasps from everyone present. Naruto's horse flew back terrified of the flames. Naruto clashed with the ground in a painful thump. The boy pushed the horse off of his body and stood wobbly-legged and drew his sword once again. The 2 other knights shot forward, swords in hand. Naruto was dazed and already beginning to lose consciousness. He couldn't lose yet. Naruto dodged the first blade coming in and weaved around the second. With his left hand he drew 2 knives from his waist and hurled them with terrifying accuracy, hitting both men from their horses, a knife in their sword arms, rendering them useless in this fight. Naruto turned back to the remaining warrior, the associate with a burning sword. Naruto took a deep breath, wondering how to deal with something like that. His horse was horrified of the flames. He was also out of knives. He glared at the man and kept his sword drawn, keeping ready for anything. The flames gutted out, though reverting back to the normal glinting blade that it was. Naruto's eyes widened with immediate surprise, and the boy turned on his heels, speeding after one of the horses to level the playing field. He could hear the man rushing after him. Naruto, though, as he was running, was tripped by one of the other knights, grabbing onto his leg. Naruto collided with the dirt face first, nearly forcing him to remove his helmet. The boy, though, fought back against it and kicked the knight, digging his steel-soled leather boots into the man's face, which was unprotected thanks to his no-visor sallet. Naruto wiggled from his grip and immediately tried his best to get to a horse without the final opponent catching up to him. Now, before I win a good amount of money, I am Thurs of Mir, the man replied with a small smile. Now what is your name? Staghelm will keep my name a secret for now, Naruto replied cheekily. Thurs rushed forward, his scimitar glinting in the light of the sun. As he came closer and closer, Naruto clashed his blade with Thurs, bringing sparks to life. The man swung for the boy, nearly digging the curved weapon down onto Naruto's cranium. The boy dodged, letting the blade cut into his shoulder. Thankfully the pauldrons did their job and blocked the strike, save for the small dent the scimitar made. Naruto punched Thurs in his gut, surprised to find that the man had a belly much like his father's. Thurs, not really liking what the Staghelm had done, rammed his fist into Naruto's face, launching him away. Naruto grabbed a sword off the ground, clashing his blade left and right against Thurs, trying his best to keep the man at bay. Thurs was simply more skilled than Naruto, and was meeting blow for blow, neither of them getting near to victory. That is, until Thurs let a little opening in his attack. Naruto continued attacking, keeping up his offensive. Thurs struggled against the new invigorated attacks. Staghelm wasn't about to give up, it seems. Thurs was surprised by Naruto's speed and the strength he put in each attack. Naruto smirked when the merman turned his attention to follow after Naruto's blade. This ends, Naruto roared, shooting his hilt around, bashing the pommel against Thurs' jaw. Naruto turned around, and with a quick spin he brought the blade down onto Thurs' neck, knocking him out completely. The cheers were thunderous and the cries could still be heard. Naruto was being helped by Bran to remove his armor as fast as possible and get ready for the joust. Bran tossed Naruto's arm braces away in no particular direction and quickly slapped on a pair of steel plate arm braces, locking them in place. Bran looked at Naruto's pauldrons and tightened the lames guarding his upper arm. Naruto, though, sadly didn't have a real breastplate made of plate armor, so the boy stuck with his coat of plates, not wanting to make it too obvious that the prince was in the tourney. He took a deep breath and handed Bran his sword, but just when the Staghelm was about to exit from the tent, the flaps moved and in came a warm breeze from the summer winds outside. Well, Naruto, Sansa said, suddenly causing Naruto's blood to run cold. You had to piss? Strange, I didn't know putting on armor was the same as pissing. Bran, I think it best that you leave, Sansa said with a tone that spoke no argument, using a tone that Bran never heard before. Now, Sansa, I was just trying to save your excuses. Sansa glared. I sat there listening to your mother and father giggle and whisper with one another for nearly half an hour. I have never felt so awkward. I just wanted to know. Sansa glared. You deserve to be punished. Naruto's face immediately drenched with sweat. Sansa walked up to him, a face filled with evil and anger. She grabbed the boy's shoulders, locking her icy blue eyes with his. Naruto kept staring, unprepared for her. Sansa shot forward, pressing her lips against his. Naruto at first tried to back away, having not kissed Sansa yet. She wrapped her arms around his neck while he held her tight. They kept up, feeling the air disappear from their lungs, but they immediately pulled away when they heard the flap of the tent open. They both turned to see Bran with a jousting shield and a blank look on his face. No words were said as the three of them stared aimlessly at one another. Bran sighed and rolled his eyes, dropping his shield on the ground and making a complete turn on his heels. Bran was muttering something loud enough for them to hear. Sansa looked at Naruto and he at her before they went back to their lip lock. Once again they had to pull away as they both heard knights shouting and men running back and forth. For the joust? I thought you "We're here to kill me." Naruto laughed nervously. "I suppose I was wrong. I'll kill you if you lose." Sansa laughed. "I know lady hasn't tasted prince yet. Now I'm starting to think that I'm beginning to rub off on you." Naruto laughed, leaving the tent. "I wouldn't say it's a bad thing." "Oh wait." Sansa grabbed Naruto. "A knight needs a lady's favor." She handed the boy a large red and white ribbon from her red hair. The boy gave her a small nod and disappeared into the arena. Sansa watched him leave and took a deep breath to calm her speeding heart. It seems the songs were coming true for her. With a fleet of foot she appeared back in her seat next to Cersei. The queen gave Sansa a knowing look and the Stark simply met her gaze before turning her attention to the lists. Robert was drinking his wine, sputtering in laughter from a small conversation with Lord Stark. People were beginning to file into the arena once more for the main attraction. The king took a deep breath, as the first two knights were called. Jory Castle was to go against Ser Horus Redwine first, a Northman dressed in Stark armor emblazoning the grey direwolf on a field of white. His lance was designed with a spiral color of white and black. Jory took his horse up to his side of the lists with a calm expression wrought across his face. He reached up with his shield arm, pulling his visor down to the opposite end of the lists. Horus Redwine was dressed in heraldic mail bearing the sigil of House Redwine, a grape cluster on a field of azure. His own lance was painted with a spiraling design of blue on purple. The two men stared at one another, ready for the horn on first go. "I need to unhorse him," Jory told himself. "Lord Stark is watching for House Redwine." Horus thought, "But such simple Northmen is this who I'm to go against? Oh well, I guess it is to happen." The horn blew with a resounding resonance. The two men rushed at each other, their lances couched and ready. Jory was coming in close, but Horus feigned a block, bringing Jory and him to bring their lances up. The people roared out at their first charge. Sansa watched with a frown. Jory could have easily unhorsed Ser Horus with his eyes closed, but again the two men rounded the barrier, brought their lances down into the couched position, speeding up ready to meet their targets. Jory pulled his arm back and shot it forward. Despite the heavy weight the lance carried, immediately Horus was sent flying back in a hailstorm of splinters and shattered wood. People roared in approval, screaming at both Horus and Jory. Some jeers for the horror of the arbor and the rest cheers for the honor guard captain of the hand. Ser Horus looked down dejectedly and was helped away by two of his squires and his horse pulled along by a third. Jory rode down towards the end of the barrier, raising his lance towards the sky. A page came forth and called the name of the next knight. "Ser something of who really cares Fry?" Jory shook his head and sighed in defeat, knowing that defeating a Fry wasn't going to increase his renown. Upon a black horse, a man of lanky features appeared, clearly nervous about his placement in all of this. In his right hand a lance bearing the colors of House Fry, light blue spirals with white on his heraldic mail. He bore the sigil of House Fry, two stone gray towers connected by a bridge over a dark gray field over blue water, a strange sigil for an equally strange house. Jory wondered who he was really about to go against, ready to speak with the fool that decided tonight. This boy. The horn was blown and Jory was beginning to regret not stopping the fight and telling the boy to quiet. The Fry was going to be in a world of hurt. Jory lapped the reins on his horse, launching ahead, bringing his lance to the couched position, waiting for the right moment. Jory thought about ramming the Fray's cock with a lance, but deemed it unnecessary, finding that no one would want to breed with Fry anyway. Fighting back the laugh he was about to feel rise up, Jory launched his lance forward, gutting the Fry from his horse, sending the knight from his horse. The boy rolled through the dirt, kicking up a small cloud of dirt, revealing an unconscious knight laying face down on the lists. Jory pulled the reins, calming his horse, and brought his lance upwards. Disappointed by his second opponent, the crowd cheered nevertheless. Justs were the most important feature of the tourney. The unconscious Fry was dragged away by his squires, also Frays, and disappeared altogether into the Fry tent. Jory nodded his head and sat upon his horse with a bored expression. He was wondering who his next opponent would be. He took a deep breath and watched as a brown strider appeared with a man dressed in light brown armor, almost copper-like. He wore the sigil of House Brune, a bear paw, brown on white within a double trace. Sure brown. He was a simple-looking man, not ugly but not handsome either. He arrived with an equally simple lance, boring colors of simple brown. Oh gods, I hope he'll be a challenge. Jory sighed. Naruto was messing with his coat of plates, finding it annoying to deal with. Bran tied the braces tightly enough and secured the lames, but his pauldrons were slightly loose from the constant throwing and swinging of his swords and knives. But now his coat was loose around his waist, bringing an annoying, uneven feeling to his breeches and the waistline. He was about to roar in frustration until a hand rested on his shoulder. It was massive and seemed to belong to a giant of a man. Naruto turned to see none other than his father, the king, watching him with utter amusement. "To think you'd join the tourney under Staghelm." Robert laughed. "You're not as clever as you think yet." Naruto, why, you're not angry with me? Naruto asked with a raised brow. Angry? Robert asked with an incredulous look. Bahaha, gods, now child, if it weren't for the prude Lord Eddard Stark, I'd be hiding beneath my armor and doing the tourney as well here. Robert tossed the boy a great breastplate. Father, Naruto Looked at the piece of metal. It's the armor I was intending to use. Robert smiled, resting his hand on Naruto's pauldron-covered shoulders. It's been a long time since I've been able to wear my armor. Your soft-headed Uncle Lance'll actually believe there to be an armor stretcher. Armor stretcher, Naruto deadpanned. The two burst into laughter, placing their hands on their knees, gasping out for breath. Within seconds, once they finished, wiped the stray tear from the corner of their eyes and taking deep breaths to calm down. Robert stared at his son while Naruto slapped the armor over his chest. His son was a lot like him, and it surprised him to no lengths. Naruto, despite his rather fearful upbringing, still ended up being strong and resilient, and Robert felt that there was still time to mend their relationship. Robert nodded at the boy, finding there no more words to be spoken, and walked away. Wait, father, Naruto called, stopping Robert in his heels. Yes, Naruto, what is it? Robert asked. Well, I was wondering, how do I joust when I don't have a lance? Naruto asked with a sheepish grin. Cersei sighed when she realized that Robert was gone. She frowned when thoughts arose. He was drunk, he was in battle heat. Watching others fight, those two together always equaled Robert finding somewhere to bed and not be seen until later that night. Even at an event like this, she felt her heart break slightly at the implications after all the work she put in over the last month since Winterfell was for nothing. If that was the truth, but in his absence the bloody tourney had just begun, and Cersei didn't know what that could possibly mean until a page asked her to choose which one had won one of the matches. The Lannister had never felt so open. Her green eyes widened with surprise. Judge, Cersei thought with an incredulous look on her face. I am only here to talk with Robert. The first didn't even pay attention that well in the melee, until Naruto started showing his true fighting skill. And even then, saying I paid attention is a stretch. Cersei sighed and tried her best to figure out who to choose. She asked the page who did better and who got more strikes. The page looked at her in confusion, not understanding her question, but did his best to piece together what she was saying. Oh, if by strikes earned, then Jory Castle had won the round. The page was suddenly interrupted by Cersei's wave of dismissal. Go on then, this Jory Castle won the round, Cersei said with a calm tone. Bring up the next two knights, my lord. Hand, your queen requires your presence, Cersei said, trying to sound overly dignified. Sansa gave the queen a look, but Cersei quickly dismissed it as well. Your grace, Ned asked, by the gods, how do I judge a joust? Cersei frowned. That was about 20 minutes ago, and now she was starting to grow impatient with these boring justs. After everything that Lord Stark told her, Cersei was more critical, focusing her eye on the different matches over and over. Knights, true, landed, and hedge. Over and over she watched them rush at each other at the same angles, making her wonder if some of these men win their matches by luck or skill. For a moment she believed that she could win a joust on her own, finding it to be a simple match for simple men in shining armor. How pompous she'd become after judging 7 matches. Suddenly from the far side a large man was seen walking up. Cersei trailed her green eyes over to the man, surprised that he wasn't stumbling in every direction or sputtering nonsense. Better yet, she was wondering why he didn't have some nameless whore in his arms. Robert, though, did have a wineskin in his hand. Cersei gave him a small smile, expecting him to ignore her, but he brought his hand down, caressing her cheeks down to her chin as he plopped down into the grand chair next to her. Cersei looked at him with wide eyes, slightly afraid to ask where he was. Before you ask, I was with Naruto, Robert replied. The fool didn't even know how to joust, but he was so ready and sure of himself to do it anyway. He didn't even have a bloody lance. Too excited. Cersei facepalmed slowly. Well, my love, it seems that you didn't indulge in whores. I don't need them, Robert replied, especially if my queen waits for me like this. Now what did I miss? Not much, Cersei replied. Jory Castle of Winterfell unhorsed some no name. Your grace, Sansa interrupted with respect. That man was a fry. He's a lord, a knight. You said he's a fry? Cersei looked at her with a look of disgust. Even worse than a no-name anyway. Jory then went against Sir Lothier Brune, and after 3 tilts I decided that Jory won, even if it was by a close shot. Tilt? Robert asked with wide eyes. You know jousting terms now. By the gods, I've seen it all. So far nothing interesting has happened, Cersei said through clenched teeth. Jaime is to go up for the next tilt. He's to be going up against this mysterious stag. How many bets on who'll win? Robert asked. I'll take my chances with the stag helm, Sir. Jaime is overdone. I'll match your bet, Robert, Cersei replied with a smirk. I think skill and experience will defeat luck. I guess we'll see. Naruto rode up to the end of the barrier, his heart racing within his armor, his breath hitched at the thought of trying to unhorse his uncle. The night the boy aspired to become Naruto gripped his annoying Verwood lance, griping at the sheer unnecessary weight. His shield bore no sigil, keeping his identity safe and free from the sight of the people and the other contestants. His lance, those sadly bore the colors of House Baratheon. Hopefully no one would catch on yet or notice. Naruto watched his uncle come along, draped in the white cloak of the Kingsguard and the shining armor. The man lowered his visor over his face and nodded to the stag helm. Naruto watched his uncle, knowing that he was great at hiding his movements and feigning attack. Naruto watched the knight unhorse countless other knights with relative ease, both with a strange skill that kept his opponents falling for The same tricks Naruto though wasn't about to let the man unhorse him. Naruto gripped the Verwood, specifically choosing it for his joust with Sir Jamie. He wanted to defeat him fast, and soon an immediate unhorsing was going to grant him unbelievable renown as the one to unhorse the Kingslayer. After a single tilt, Naruto shook in excitement as the knight took his placement at the opposite end of the lists. It was a resounding roar. Naruto and Jamie shot forward, dirt and mud flying in their wake as their horses took them ahead. Jamie was the first to bring his lance down, appearing lighter than Naruto's own. The stag helm lowered his lance and aimed right for Jamie's shield arm, just as Jamie was doing for him. Naruto was going to feign him, just like Jamie was undoubtedly going to do with the closing space and the seconds passing on. Naruto watched as his vision, blurred and time flowed at a painfully slow pace. He could see his uncle getting ready for his strike, surprising the boy by the Lannister's sudden change of tactics. Naruto though wasn't about to let up. The boy shot his arm forward, digging the lance into Jamie's shoulder, shattering the tip of the Verwood lance. The crowd gasped as Jamie fell back with a lightning pace, a shower of wood chips coming from his chest. Robert and Cersei looked on with wide eyes, never seeing such a move connect with Jamie before. People suddenly began to cheer for Staghelm, but the boy pulled on his reins, stopping his horse mid-length of the arena. He jumped off of his horse and jumped over the barrier, tossing away his helmet, revealing his blonde locks and sweaty face. People's eyes were wide at what they saw. The prince was jousting. Naruto didn't care about what the people were whispering. He overdid his attack and put too much power. Jamie writhed on the arena floor. Naruto cursed, pulling Jamie's arm over. Back at the stands, Robert and Cersei were completely awestruck by what was happening. Robert narrowed his eyes. Something wasn't right. Cersei gave him a pleading look, and the king himself jumped down for his Kingsguard knight. Barristan Selmy and a few other knights rushed over when they realized something was wrong with Jamie. Naruto was suddenly pushed away by Barristan Selmy. They looked over his body and quickly carried him to the medical tent, finding a large piece of wood embedded in his neck with another sticking out from his armpit. That hit sure did a number on the knight. The boy's blue eyes watched with fear as the man was carried away, his body cold and his blood barely flowing. The fun in the joust took a dark turn, the joy and the excitement gone. The boy gritted his teeth as his breath began to itch, finding it harder and harder to breathe. He clenched his fists, trying his best to fight back against the tears already stinging in his eyes. Everyone was staring at him though. He was the man that took down 18 knights on his own, the man that not only unhorsed but injured the Kingslayer. It was none other than their prince Naruto. The small folk began to cheer, screaming out Naruto's name, praising him for his skill, completely forgetting that the Kingslayer was in as his uncle. The prince quickly ran off to the medical tent, needing to see if his uncle was to survive. Naruto could only hope that Jamie would live, but just as he was about to enter the tent, his father pulled him back and began to drag him along. Naruto of course fought back against him, wanting to see his uncle. Robert didn't care and continued to drag him to somewhere the blonde didn't care to see, but suddenly Naruto was spun around on his heels and pressed against a post. Naruto was bloodshot, blabbering, speaking incoherently, and Robert had enough of it. He glared at Naruto and picked up the boy's shield, slamming against the prince, getting Naruto's attention. The blonde looked at Robert with a look of fear and surprise, clearly shell-shocked with what he'd done. Robert expected this, but smacked Naruto across the face, knocking the fear from Naruto's eyes. Get a hold of yourself, boy, Robert growled. Your uncle Jamie has been through worse than this. He isn't going to die, but your chances of winning the joust surely will. Naruto, you have to continue. Honor demands it. But you, Uncle Jamie Naruto took a moment to take in slow deep breaths. I might have stopped this, Robert roared. No future king shall be acting like a child so green he shits grass. What? Naruto's eyes widened. What are you talking about? After everything you've been doing, after all that you've been able to fix, you have what it takes to become the next king. Robert told him straight, this is simply a terrible jousting accident. Naruto, things like this happen all the bloody time. To be a king you will deal with things much worse. 7 fucking kingdoms, boy, and this is nothing compared to the realm, so get your head on straight and give the people something to believe in. Be the honorable, renowned king they want. But it's just a joust, Naruto replied. It's not important, not important. Robert looked at Naruto and immediately burst into laughter. You missed the point of such a thing. A joust is as much politics as being king. As knights from all over will arrive to show their skill to other lords, to increase their political standing. That is the point of jousting and tourneys, Naruto. All these men have something in common: armor, but you are something else entirely. Naruto looked down dejectedly at the implications. He leaned his head against the trunk of the tree and let his arms hang lax. Boy, you have done more than what I couldn't have even dreamed to do at your age. Robert clapped Naruto on his shoulder with a powerful pound. You defeated 18 seasoned knights and even defeated Thuras of Mir, who's never lost a melee. You jumped onto a horse and within seconds defeated the mountain of all the people. The mountain the small folk love you, the ladies adore you, and The knights fear you. You have a gift, Naruto. Use it. Perform for the people. Show them what their future king can offer. Naruto felt a small rejuvenation within him and immediately felt his arms shake in excitement. His father gave him a small smile and walked away, tossing the boy a different lance, not wanting to impale his next opponents. Naruto caught it, finding the lance to belong to Jamie. Naruto looked back to the tent, watching a small team of silent sisters trail into the tent with boxes and medical supplies. He took a deep breath, whispering a silent prayer to the mother. The boy sighed and ran along, calling Bran's name, bellowing above the noise of the small folk. Bran looked down at Naruto to see a new light in the blonde's eyes. He rushed from his seat and even jumped off the podium to accompany Naruto. Sansa took a deep breath to calm her raging nerves. Cersei was no different. The twin of Sir Jamie watched the interaction with a racing heart. Naruto hit too hard. He overestimated his opponent in every way possible. Cersei took a deep breath, placing a hand over her mouth to try and suppress her growing frown, but then Naruto appeared, a new strong expression his face. Bran arrived next to him, Naruto's horse in tow. Naruto was handed his stag helm and the boy quickly slid the helm over his head, bringing a powerful roar from the small folk. Now for the remaining knights of this tourney, I have something to say. Robert spoke with a bellowing voice. My son, the prince has been participating in secret. Should you come against him, treat him as you would any other opponent. No special treatment is to be given. Better yet, even give him a bloody challenge. Gods. Naruto took a deep breath. I don't need more challenges today. Ser Andar Royce of House Royce, heir of Lord Yon Royce, and runestone filled with undulled blood and pride. He arrived dressed in heraldic mail with overbearing pauldrons covering more than just his shoulders. He bore the sigil of House Royce, black iron studs on a field of bronze bordered by runes, coming from a family with a hallowed tradition of creating great warriors. Naruto knew that Ser Andar was going to be no different, and if his father's offer of letting knights go all out on him was any indication, these knights will do his father's bidding. Great, Naruto thought, I have my work cut out for me at the lists. Naruto's visor remained up, revealing his face to Ser Andar. The two of them shared a look as they passed by one another. Naruto sized him up, giving him a quick glare, receiving one as well. Once they reached their ends of the barrier, Naruto eyed his lance made of Verawood as well. Ser Andar wasn't going to take chances with Naruto. The honor of House Royce was on the line. Naruto was starting to see the bigger picture in all of this, from the small glances that Ser Andar was giving him to the whispers Lord Baelish was giving to Lord Renly and Lord Stark. Everything was a game, everything was a piece in a puzzle. Naruto gripped his lance and locked eyes with the knight pulling his horse around the barrier. Naruto let loose his held breath, taking off at the sound of the horn. Ser Andar Royce closed and looking akin to a bronze blur. He could see the knight pull back his arm, bringing more to his couched lance, but Naruto was going to make sure that the man didn't connect. He was going to make sure that no one after him connects. He was going to give all of them the power and the pain of the seven hells combined. Come on, let's go.